Crypto market updates. Happy Thursday, folks. We are the last few days of the summer. September 23rd, equinox. Also, the launch of Bakkt is at that time as well. So looking at Bitcoin, not a lot has changed as far as Bitcoin's concerned. A little bit has shifted for altcoins. We'll see if they can hold their first higher lows, and we'll look into that. So Bitcoin is pretty much just consolidating. It's doing its thing. We had a bit of a drop this morning, and it actually fell fairly close to an ascending trend line support on this consolidation, right? So like I'd mentioned before, I kind of, both would be valid. One could look at it as a descending triangle, but there are higher lows being produced as well, right? So at the moment, I'm leaning more towards like symmetrical, and like just to look at it from a different perspective. Sometimes, because you notice how the candlesticks look a little bit different than they do in, let's say, bitcoinwisdom.io. So I like to kind of toggle between the two, Coinigy or this one, and just like a quick look at this with my eye, you could see it's kind of producing a bit of a almost like a pennant-like formation, right, in the larger time frame. And stochastic RSI has crossed on the weekly below 20, right, at the lows. And so anytime that's happened, and this is something that I tend to look at for the larger swings, because that's generally what I'm predominantly interested in as far as the markets are concerned, is the meta trend as well as the larger swings, right? And just kind of going for those larger swings for, obviously to reduce taxable events, to save time, and to lean more towards, not day trading or trading every week or anything like that, right? It's almost, I would say it's like a more passive form of I'm always active as far as like every day checking into the markets and looking at things. But what I like about this approach, and the reason why I shifted gears into that, one of the reasons why, is because I knew when you're in an early trend, either phase one in accumulation or phase two with a lot of consolidation, I know that there's a tremendous amount of patience that's required. And if I'm trying to like catch every move and be in the trenches every single day, what that can do is it can make me more impatient, right? So by being a little bit more detached, easygoing about it, and focusing predominantly on the larger meta trend and the bigger swings, it allows me to be a lot more patient, right? With this particular strategy. That's just me. That's my strategy and what I've been doing pretty much for the whole year. 2019, I shifted gears when we capitulated. I shifted gears into that strategy because the probability of a phase one was a lot higher. What's interesting about the phase one on this cycle is that it was a lot shorter than in the previous cycle in 2015. So that was interesting. However, the current consolidation that's happening on this triangle, I mean, this is nothing new, right? We talked about this a lot as well, how we had that massive ascending triangle over here after breaking out of the lower accumulation range, right? It was a nice, the triangle was nicer looking, but it wasn't always an ascending triangle. It was a symmetrical triangle for the longest time. So for here, it was, right, you're looking at 158 days. Now our current consolidation isn't as long as that, right? Let's just say about 90 days. We do have a major event coming. There wasn't really a major event here. I mean, there are always events happening right? But we have the futures launch, the hard futures launch. They've already done soft launch, the hard launch on the 23rd. That could end up, which is on Monday, we might end up with a big move on that news, right? Now, all that to say, just because it's consolidating, and in my opinion, it's in phase 2 of the bull trend, that still line in the sand of support, and this is what Chris is talking about, right? And this line in the sand. Obviously, if we break this support for whatever reason, then do is just buy low and wait is really my strategy in general. But right now I'm leaning towards breakout and continuation, right? I'm leaning towards that. So that's Bitcoin right now. Long period of consolidation, and this triangle can change shape. It could suddenly, like, just because it breaks this descending line doesn't necessarily mean it can't evolve. It could break the line, it could pop up and then turn into an ascending triangle, and then it could consolidate a lot longer. Who knows? But generally speaking, I like the fact that it's consolidating around the 10K area. It dips over, it dips under. 10K really seems to be a bit of a magnet area right now. 10K is like a nice round emotional 5-digit support. I've also talked about many times how, you know, having the market take its time and establish itself in that new 5-digit territory, I don't see that as a bad thing. I see it as a good thing. So consolidating at that area instead of just, like, you know, pumping at that area and crashing fast at that area, right? Now, there's something else I want to look at, as the volume. Tom Seven's asking, what do you think about the fact that we are so deep into this consolidation power without breaking out yet? That's the nature of consolidation, is it actually takes, usually for the bigger patterns, and the biggest patterns happen, in my opinion, and what has happened in the past with Bitcoin anyways in this market cycles, is early trend. The earlier the bull trend, the longer the consolidation periods tend to be, right? And usually, like in latter bull trend, you don't have a lot of consolidation. Like when we just kind of, you're coming to the end when it just keeps shooting up with very little consolidation. It goes up vertical. You know, things are starting to get dicey, right? When they go completely parabolic like that. You know, so that the fact that we didn't continue going parabolic here and we actually corrected and consolidated means that the bull trend is still healthy. And a lot of people have been calling this parabol and comparing it to the all-time high. But I pointed out multiple times that we had 3 major parabolas, and that having a mini one after a breakout, it's all scale, right? It looks parabolic when you're on the cutting edge. But as soon as you correct, have healthy correction, and then go sideways with some consolidation, then suddenly the trend becomes healthy because it's starting to establish support in through a specific price zone, right? An area of price where, you know, buyers and sellers are playing tug of war at this price, and that at the present moment in time, buyers and sellers on all the Bitcoin markets have decided that, you know, based off of supply and demand or whatnot, $10,000 seems to be a reasonable equilibrium or reasonable price at the moment, right? For now, until we make a move and break out. So a breakdown is still possible. If I had to give a percentage as to what I believe is the probability, I think it'd probably be 60-40, 60 in favor of breaking upwards, right? After its consolidation. And the reason why I say that is because I believe we're in phase 2 in a bull cycle with higher highs and higher lows, and we broke out a lower range, and we've even cleared multiple levels, multiple points of resistance, right? Just kind of cleared through them. And this is the one, this is the point of resistance that we've actually spent on this consolidation. If you look at this point of resistance, Bitcoin has spent more time on the upper edge of this resistance than on the lower edge. It seems like the there has been dumps, but it seems like when we dump into the 9K zone, it doesn't tend to stay long there. It bounces fairly quickly, right? Whereas it's majority of this consolidation has happened above this 10K point of resistance, right? So obviously nothing's guaranteed, and we all know that. We know nothing's ever guaranteed. But what I do to kind of clear confusion, especially when looking at the meta trend, a larger trend, is I just ask myself, okay, well, what has the market, are we in a bull trend or a bear trend? That's the first question, right? Well, what's the definition of a bull or bear trend? Well, bull trend's higher highs and higher lows. Does Bitcoin produce higher highs and higher lows? Yes. Another question is, are extremely long periods of consolidation at different price levels normal in bull trends for Bitcoin? In the past, have we seen that? Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of like to be expected. Like I said, 2016, we had 2 triangles that took 6 months to pop. 6 months. We haven't even hit 6 months yet on this one. Now, like I said, it doesn't have to be 6 months or whatever, because it happened, this lower level right here happened a lot faster, right? So right now we're probably, I think it was like 3 months, right? Yeah, pretty close to 3 months. So higher highs, higher lows, are long periods of consolidation to be expected in bull trends? Yes. Fundamentally, is the industry growing? Is there a lot of market growth? Are there new financial products being created? Are there new institutions wanting to get involved in Bitcoin, so on and so forth? Yes, there's still growth in the crypto industry and Bitcoin. So, so far, if I just look at the moment, the market is a bull trend, right? So I'm gonna treat it as such. It doesn't mean that it has to be a guaranteed bull trend and that weird stuff can't happen, chaos can't happen or black swans can't happen or whatever. Like if for whatever reason, regulators decided to, ban Bitcoin or something nuts, right? Then obviously those would be big black swan events that can really skew the fundamentals and cause like emotional panic and stuff like that, right? Those things can happen and do happen in crypto, right? So you do have black swan events and stuff like that. So things can change, but thus far it's still technically a bull trend for Bitcoin, right? So I have to just kind of treat it as such. And the way I'm treating it as such is, I did happen to take some profit off the table in the last bout at a fairly decent area, close to 13K. Now I'm just waiting. I took a little bit of that capital, bought some Leo, bought some Doge. Those dipped down a little bit, kind of dipped my foot in. The rest is kind of sitting in fiat. I also, took a little profit off the table, sold some crypto. I believe it was like right up here at the 8K zone, right? That went into the bank. And, it's just kind of like middle path, right? You buy low, sell high, buy as low as I can, wait. Same thing goes for altcoins. Wait and be patient. And then when the price goes up, that's when I start to sell. The price goes down, I start to buy. The price goes up, I start to sell. Unless it's like a breakout or something. Breakout, and that occasion is like the price goes up and you buy some, because the idea of a breakout is you wanna follow momentum, right? And there might be, if one can catch it, there might be a good breakout play here coming up. But personally, I'd rather find some action in altcoins, just because once alts start to get cooking, the percentage gains can be a lot higher. So look at altcoins. That said, I have quite a good exposure to alts. So I'm even, as far as like buying some more stuff, I'm still being patient. Like, I'm not really in a rush. Even if I don't end up buying anything else, I'm fine, because I've got more than enough exposure. Like, I've packed most of my bags early this year, and it was only recently that I took some profit off the table and kept some cash on the exchange, because my exchange accounts have been empty for the whole year. Once I packed my bags up and withdrew all my money, that was it. I had nothing to do except wait, really. I'm still waiting. So I'm just being patient. My patience is also based on the experience I had in the last cycle. Again, no guarantees, but I've kind of been through a lot of this before. So, and as I'm sure others here have as well. And so a lot of people on social media really, you see the people getting really emotional about all this chop, about altcoins, whether they're like emotionally bullish, extremely bullish, or emotionally bearish, and very excitable or angry or whatever. And the thing is like, patience, you can't be emotional and patient at the same time, right? In my opinion, it's hard to, you can have emotions, of course, but patience usually has a certain level of detachedness to it, to the market. It also depends on what your goals are. If you're just trading the smaller swings in the markets, then it doesn't even really matter, bull or bear. Some days are intradays are bearish and intradays are bullish, or whatever, or in between weeks, the oscillations. But when looking at the meta trend and the larger cycle, really, like, patience for me, it's like very two simple ingredients for looking at the meta trend, for investing or trading in the meta trend, is buy as low as you can and be patient, and then sell when the price hits certain milestones on the up and up. So very simple. Yesterday and the day before and stuff, we saw some green in alts. We still see some alts pushing some green. Nice bounce on a bunch of things. Stellar had like, it went up like 40% or something like that yesterday. So that was pretty cool. Tezos kind of bounced off that dollar zone. We'll look at Tezos right now. I've been really kind of like looking at the BTC charts as well. Just paying attention to the BTC and the USD both, but just kind of making note that Tezos is kind of at an interesting area. Kind of just bounced off of support, producing slightly higher lows on the BTC chart. So it looks like there's a lot of kind of supporting through here. It almost like this oscillation off support kind of, to me, looks similar market behavior to this zone, right? And it's all a matter of scale. So yes, there's some what seems like fairly large oscillations, and indeed these are big price movements on the upside and downside, right, on BTC. However, what if I were to look at this on the larger cycle? To me, this hasn't even had a real bull trend in it. Like, yes, this was bullish when this happened here, and certainly there was money to be made for anyone who bought at the lows, for sure. I wasn't really interested in trading that swing. But on the larger picture, if it breaks out of this range and goes into like a real bull cycle, like let's say you start to get into the 2017 type bull cycle that we saw with altcoins, and that happened a few times, and you get, some category 5 alt seasons where they're gaining rapidly and going parabolic against Bitcoin and in the USD values, then suddenly on scale, what looks like large swings and price movements can suddenly look very, very small. And I've showed many, many examples of this, from previous cycle. Strat was a good example of this. Once upon a time, you look at this down here. This is what I'm talking about. I'm not saying Tezos is necessarily going to do that. Not anything's guaranteed, but I kind of put my money on anticipating that Tezos will make some nice gains. Now, if you look all the way down here, this looks like nothing, right? This looks like just this really small range, and then all of a sudden, takes out that range and then goes nuts. Like, who knows if we'll get an alt season that ridiculous again? But I've seen altcoins go parabolic, multiple times. If you scale into this lower area, suddenly you get these massive percentage swings. Here's a 10x on the upside. Here's a 67% crash on the downside, right? You get these suddenly, this seems like a really big deal until it hits a mega bull trend, and then suddenly that's not a big deal anymore, right? And I actually sold, I didn't catch this entire move on Stratus. I had actually sold a bunch like way too soon. You start bagging 10x's and stuff, you're taking some serious profit off the table. And then then suddenly, so I've learned from that as well, right? In that previous cycle, you learn a few things through market cycles. You learn to take some heavy profits when markets go up straight vertical. You learn to be patient and try not to sell your bags too soon in the early stages. And you learn to not panic and freak out, or you learn to buy when the markets are really low and look like they're dead and everyone hates it and it's just chopping around sideways and bleeding out for, years or whatever, or a year, so on and so forth, right? At least in crypto, right? Crypto is like very supply and demand, it's similar to almost like gold having market cycles and stuff. Anyways, this is just based on the past. I think the first alt season realistically was 2013, really. So this is just based on my personal experience in these markets. It's not to say things are always going to stay this way forever, or that there'll always be these market cycles. And, things definitely change. They also change as crypto, the more crypto interacts with the mainstream, the more they change each other, right? Crypto changes legacy finance, and legacy finance and regulations also change crypto, right? We've seen that with ICOs, right? Prior to 2017, ICOs were basically just a free market, and it was just, anyone could raise funds selling one token for another token, selling a token for Bitcoin or selling a token for Ethereum or whatever, or some other tokens, Litecoin coins, whatever. But that changed, right? So now suddenly the regulatory environment changed, and so the landscape changed, and so you're not seeing, and sometimes that's a positive, right? 2017, like we're seeing the after effects of 2017, because 2017 got way too ridiculous, right? Like there's too much greed, there's too much crap, there's too much, people just kind of perpetually, dumping these crappy tokens, so on and so forth. So obviously, this pendulum had to swing hard to the other side, and then perhaps we'll find some happy medium in the middle. I think that would be a win-win for all parties, is a happy medium. That's why I think STOs are kind of, they're obviously interesting, that you can tokenize securities, traditional securities where you actually get equity in something, right? All right, other question. What do you think of the news that VanEck withdrew their ETF proposal? Do you think that VanEck withdraws copying a bearish reception, or do you see it as removing a potentially bearish regulatory rejection following Bakkt's launch? What are you expecting to see in the markets in the run-up to Bakkt's launch? Okay, so that's good questions. Let's go back to the Bitcoin chart for that. So I'm leaning towards, I mean, it's all speculation what their intent was, because, you know, I wasn't not you know, in their boardroom or anything like that, or know anybody from there. So it's like, it's pure speculation on my part as to what their intent was. To me, it would make sense that if they got a hint or a sniff, or their lawyers or whatever thought, maybe it's going to be rejected. To me, I actually think it makes sense. And what you, the latter of what you said, do you see it as removing a potentially bearish regulatory rejection following Bakkt's launch? That seems like that would be fairly strategic to do something like that, but I don't really know what their intent is. And what are you expecting to see in the markets in the run up to Bakkt's launch? Well, so far we've been getting consolidation leading up to Bakkt's launch. I mean, we obviously got a bullish move, right, this year. So if we had continued to trend upwards towards Bakkt, then I think there'd be like a sell on the news. There could still very well be a sell in the news. You know, maybe whales use Bakkt as a means to, you know, dump some coins or whatnot. However, what's interesting with Bakkt is it could actually end up attracting a lot more liquidity in the markets, in the actual Bitcoin markets, right? Because of its nature in being Bitcoin settled versus, you know, with cash or USD settled futures that we had at the highs. You know, people, financial institutions, whatever, could keep shorting, and it all gets settled in cash. You have zero exposure. It had no impact necessarily on the supply and demand dynamic of Bitcoin. Whereas if you're settling in Bitcoin, then it does affect that dynamic. Like I said, if we have a big washout, I will be buying a dip for a bounce play. So, and if we break out, then I'm going to sit back and enjoy the show. So I've kind of simplified my life that way. I mean, you know, if we did have a shakeout, it wouldn't be the end of the world. It could certainly like delay the speed of this bull trend for sure. You know, we probably have to, like, for it to stay bullish, you'd probably have to consolidate into an even much larger pattern and do some sideways, as long as we could stay above that 6K zone or whatnot. But I've kind of simplified things for myself. If it wants to break down, then I'll buy low, like I always do. And if it breaks out, I'll sit back and enjoy the show, and I'll you know, sell a little bit more along the way. We'll see how altcoins respond to that. Altcoins are kind of a little bit of mixed bag. You know, it's difficult to read as to whether, you know, if this did break out, would alts bleed out against the Bitcoin charts more? I would kind of lead towards some correlation and all of them gaining together and making that shift, just because again, just looking at the pendulum swing, I always just think of it as a pendulum swing. What's the most extreme thing happening right now, right? And how can I position myself for the next most extreme thing to happen, for it to swing on the opposite end, right? And so, you know, when you look at, it's like, let's just look at Ethereum, for example. If you look at altcoins, you know, on the BTC charts, The most extreme is, let's just look at, most extreme is that, you know, they've been bleeding out. They had some nice bounces in the spring, the early 2019. We had some gains in both BTC and USD. Obviously, altcoins on the USD charts are still, most of them are still up much higher than the beginning of the year, regardless of a bunch of them having bled out on the BTC charts. A lot of them had major USD corrections, but have produced higher lows on the USD charts, right? Therefore, still in practical terms, still being in a, I would say, an early bull trend. It seems like Bitcoin is in a phase 2, and altcoins still seem like a phase 1 right now. A phase 1, like kind of accumulation ranges where, you know, you'll get a move up and then a crash and, you know, perhaps a higher low or whatever, and you start breaking out of ranges. So we haven't seen consistent, you know, just slight higher lows, right? And even this crash produced a higher low, you know, from here, from that point right there. But they're chopping around. Things can actually take time for alts. But the thing is that Ethereum's low, after having bled out 94.35%, 95% or whatever, was what was it, $80, $85? It's still a heck of a lot higher price-wise than it was in the last cycle. Now that's for major coins like Ethereum. Same with Ripple, even though Ripple severely underperformed, so on and so forth. It still stayed, you know, around 30 cents or you know, in the high 20s. It didn't go back to half a penny the last cycle, right? So altcoins, a lot of those altcoins are still in a new cycle with higher prices than the previous cycle. And it also has a lot of extreme, like Maximus has been screaming that alts are going to die and go to zero. Well, some alts go to zero, yes. A lot of alts do die. We talked about that last week, going through the valley of death. Not all altcoins get to survive. You got to try to pick the best ones, or what you feel are the better ones in that process. And we've already seen a bunch of alts die this year. Predominantly like a lot of ICO token type stuff, mostly like ICO tokens. We've seen, you know, some delistings and stuff like that, or if any, you know, you kind of see the SEC going after some of these ICOs from 2017, and they have to refund and stuff. You know, that's a sure way to kill some ERC20 tokens, right? So we have seen a lot of things get flushed out, and we'll continue to see things getting flushed out. That said, the past few days, due to all the hyper correlation, we have seen all tides rising for things that manage to stick around. And even though a lot of things will die, there's still always probably going to be hundreds of altcoins. You know, they might have to change their forms and stuff, but we'll, you know, as long as crypto is open source, there's always going to be new projects, even replacing old ones, and there'll be new scams, and there'll be, you know, some of them are scams, some of them will be quality projects, you know, so on and so forth. And then we'll probably see an STO market emerging. We haven't seen a huge STO market yet. Still very much in the early days as far as STOs are concerned. So obviously just focusing on what's in front of me right now, the most liquid markets in crypto right now, right? And there are fundamental issues. Just because some altcoins have poor fundamentals doesn't mean that they won't go in bull trends, doesn't mean that they won't get pumped, doesn't mean that Doesn't mean any of that, right? There are coins that I don't like, that I think are crappy as far as the fundamentals are concerned, and would, would maybe even prefer that their market liquidity shifted into other projects and stuff like that. But just because I don't like a coin, and just because I think some coins are too centralized or a little bit scammy, doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to go up in price, that they're not going to rise with things. Doesn't mean that whales won't pump them. Doesn't mean that new money won't start chasing whatever ticker they can find on exchanges. Human greed is the same, so on and so forth. Those dynamics and emotion and then market cycles don't necessarily change. What does change is that sometimes top projects dry up, liquidity dries up, and they fizzle out, and they're no longer top projects. And then some of those top projects still see kicking around. Maybe they drop from the top 10 and end up on page 5 on CoinMarketCap or whatever. That certainly happens. That's a normal thing we see happen. And there's some projects that just tend to stick around as a top market, like a Litecoin or even Ripple, right? Or Ethereum, so on and so forth. And then there's a lot of stuff that dies, and then there's a lot of new stuff that's created, and one can still be an early adopter and a bunch of stuff, and so on and so forth. The cycles continue. Like I said, as long as this stuff's open source, probably continue being that way, unless something majorly drastic changes in the global regulatory environment or whatever. Then obviously that could be a damper. It's very difficult to stop decentralized open source protocols. Bitcoin never asks anyone permission, and look where it's at. But it would be naive to think that regulations wouldn't have a damper, or bans wouldn't, certainly damper the markets. And I certainly would, like, you can't, things suddenly become illegal and stuff, then you're gonna have bigger problems. Right? But there's nothing in the industry indicating that, right? Yes, there's more regulation. From what I've seen, a lot of the regulation is tend to be targeting the worst of the worst, right? Like outright Ponzi schemes like BitConnect, really shady ICOs that raised a bunch of money, delivered nothing, and then blew it all on whatever. Stuff like that, right? Very like over in your face stuff. We haven't seen like super heavy-handed regulation. I mean, in some areas of the world, sure, we've seen some heavy-handed stuff on Bitcoin and stuff, but it's now protected by law in China as property and recognized, and so on and so forth. So they've banned exchanges and stuff like that in China, but they haven't they haven't made Bitcoin illegal or anything like that, right? And a lot of the major power centers, Russia, which one's banned it, I think loosened it. The US, I mean, they want to regulate it and control the markets, but US, they want to make money off the markets too, so they don't want to necessarily crush innovation or crush startups and the ability to actually get a slice of the pie, generate some wealth from a new industry, right? They want to get left behind on a new growth of an industry. So there's no real, those are like the real risks, big picture. But aside from like some countries, a few countries, handful of countries, and some more regulation that we've been seeing, there's no indication that crypto is going to be made illegal or anything like that. And then here's the thing: the more money this stuff generates, the more tax revenue it generates, the more startups and economic activity it generates, the more large companies have invested hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, like the New York Stock Exchange investing hundreds of millions and backed. Like suddenly, like, their vested interests, it becomes a lot more difficult to just ban it. We're not in 2012 anymore, right? The industry has grown a lot. Suddenly you do something like that, a lot of people lose a lot of money. So things to look at. That said, it's not out of the realm of possibility. Not anything's possible, but many things are possible. Anyways, long-winded rant. Interesting thing today. So I've often spoke. There was what was it? As far as the news is concerned, CoinDesk released an interesting article in relation to EOS about it becoming too centralized and so on and so forth. And I spoke about this. Like this personally, it's not one of my preferred projects. Doesn't mean one can't make money off of it or so on and so forth. But I'm not a fan of the 21 delegate model where you vote for 21 people and so on and so forth. That model, proof of stake. We saw it with BitShares. BitShares got highly centralized and taken over. Now, obviously, it can still gain, still got a lot of volume, a lot of liquidity, but it's not my preferred project. Same reason why, Ripple's not my preferred project. Very centralized, and they control 50% of the supply, and they're selling a ton of it every quarter, hundreds of millions. Not necessarily a preferred project. Doesn't mean one can't make money off of it. And everyone's got to make their own decisions, and maybe it's a personal taste, like a flavor of ice cream or whatnot. But I personally try to go for more decentralization as much as possible. So that was interesting. So I've seen this happen with BitShares before. One of the reasons why I wasn't super keen on it, I felt like the model's too centralized from the get-go, and when they started blacklisting certain addresses and stuff, then it just seemed like it was too centralized, in my opinion, for my taste. Other interesting news: Patrick Byrne sold all of his Overstock, like $90 million, all of his Overstock shares. So he's out. He just exited. He stepped down as CEO and he sold all his shares. So, Overstock price crashed, big crash. I'm not quite sure what that does for T0. Does anybody know what the price is of the T0 token? Obviously, Overstock company still exists. T0 still exists. That's all still there. It's not like the company went bankrupt or shut down or anything like that, but he did exit, right? There's articles that were posted today on that. Market Watch and stuff has an article. All right, couple questions. So I'm not, like I said last week, I'm personally not super keen on diving into T0, and I said that for liquidity issues, but at the current moment now, this doesn't really create a lot of confidence for me. I love the idea of T0. I love the idea of investing in security token markets. So I'm just not convinced. And if I did buy some, like I think Chris bought like a little bit, small position, start a size, just to have some skin in the game. But and if I were to buy some, it'd probably be something similar, just a small amount, just to have some. But at the current moment, I'm not compelled to do so. Something else I'd done recently, I took some of the cash in my bank account just and converted it to pounds, British pounds, just because the British pounds are at kind of like historical lows compared to a Canadian dollar. So if it can bounce up to $2 on the Canadian charts in the next few years, this isn't a play that would last, I don't think it would be a few weeks or a few months or anything like that. You never know, anything's possible, but I foresee this as like, let's see what happens in a few years. Obviously, a lot of that depends on Brexit. But if it goes to $2, which it's been at quite consistently throughout history, I'll even look all the way back to the 70s. $2, I could make myself a quick 20%, right? So, I bought last week, in the 60s. We're still in the 60s. I think we're like 166 right now. So If it went to $2, that'd be 20% gain. So that's interesting. Also, if I ever decide to visit the UK or whatever, I'm buying some currency low. That's a non-crypto related thing. I thought I'd just share that anyways. A lot of the whole Brexit stuff is revolving around if they can negotiate a treaty with European Union for Northern Ireland, so on and so forth. So that's due on October 31st. It could certainly drop a lot lower. I'm not necessarily saying it can't go lower, but I tend to lean, if I'm buying low, if I look at you know, the British pound, like the Dogecoin charts, like I might not buy the exact bottom of the Dogecoin charts historically. Sometimes I average down or I'm certainly not going to be doing that with the British pound. I'll just hold. But generally I have to buy at the lower end of the range and then sell at the higher end of the range, just on spot, right? That's how you make money in the spot market. Therefore, because it's at the lower end of the range, I had to buy some, right? Just like if the US dollar ever went on parity again with the Canadian dollars, I would convert a bunch of Canadian dollars into US dollars. Just, you know, that happened, you know, 2013, 2014, I think it was on parity. And I didn't do anything about that. I didn't have a lot of money at the time. But it could be a quick 20, 30% going for major swings just in currencies. And to me, it's like very lower risk, unless the UK economy just suddenly, for whatever reason, just tanks and it just completely falls apart. But, you know, UK, London is still a financial hub of the world, right? It's still a pretty major player on the world stage. So if they're going to have issues, the rest of the world's going to have some pretty major issues as well, right? That's just going to be ripple effects. Just like if the States had issues, that would have a ripple effect, right? And then one could be hedged by investing in other things, like obviously metals and crypto and whatever. So it's just, for me now, it's just kind of like portfolio management. So sometimes I just shuffle things around a little bit, seeing if I could squeeze a little extra percentage. If I could squeeze 10 or 20% out of that on as like relatively low risk, doing it from a major currency to a major currency, then that'd be great. Okay, so yes, what am I expecting with the back thing? So I spoke on that. I don't have the same conviction with back to sell on the news that I did with the CME futures. Because at the CME futures, like we were going parabolic, right? The chart was also screaming, like this just lines up too perfectly. You know, we're going parabolic into a major sell in the news event. It means the market was extremely exaggerated. The pendulum was swinging hard on one side. Therefore, you know, safe to assume that it would swing hard on the other side and that the sell in the news was very high probability at the time. Current market has been consolidating. We're not necessarily getting extremes right now. We're not going parabolic into backed. You know, if we were here, if we had like, here's the thing, if we had gone sideways for another few months and then we just start ramping up towards backed and you know, the price was looking like this right here, then I'd say, yeah, sell in the news, high probability. In fact, there was no sell in the news, and I still took some profit because it's going parabolic, because the chart was going parabolic. It was a smaller parabola. So if the market starts to make a move leading up to backed, then the opposite could happen on its launch, right? But more consolidation, maybe the back will just push the market, lead to that breakout or breakdown. And it could also be a small sell in the news. It could, you know, obviously there's some traders who will sell in the news no matter what. They will, there's some whales who'll probably dump no matter what the news is. If it's major news, they'll probably sell into it. So there could be like a smaller shakeout on that, but I'm not necessarily convinced that it'll be selling the news and okay, we're back into a bear trend. I think that's a lower probability personally. That my opinion is that that's a lower probability. Obviously, I don't have a crystal ball, so but we're just always dealing with probabilities and possibilities and also self-analysis on our own perception of life, perception of the markets, our own emotions, and then the greater market sentiment, right? That's really all we're doing in these markets, right? And then trying to stay balanced, right? You're walking on that rope, always trying to stay balanced, trying to make sure you don't fall off the rope type of thing, right? And then try to perfect that balance. So it's constant shuffling. And so anyways, for me, I don't feel like that's going into like another bear trend is a high probability myself. So, and that's not to say that I'm a permabull, because people know that I'm not a permabull. You know, people know I was extremely bearish when we crossed 10K for the first time. So I'm often a contrarian when the markets are extremes. You can't be a contrarian though when sometimes you got to ride the trend and go with the herd, right? Sometimes you can't fight the herd in a trend either. You can't be a contrarian at the wrong moments. It's got to only be when things are a little bit too exaggerated on one side or the other, like a big capitulation or big parabola or whatever. So I think though, whatever happens, I think we will get a breakout, likely get a breakout leading or breakdown leading into it or shortly after. That's what I'm leaning towards. So it might not be a triangle that consolidates for 6 months, another 3 months, unless it breaks out and then hits some resistance and then just chops around a bunch more in a range. Then suddenly the structure changes a bit and then we're producing like a much larger consolidation pattern, and we'd have to look at how that works out. Oh, and by the way, the Brexit thing, you know, that's not necessarily, I see it as like lower, or the British pounds, I see it as like lower risk because I'm dealing from one major currency to another, right? We're like, I don't think it's going to turn into the Zimbabwe dollar or anything like that. But I just have to preface, and I like to buy things low, but I have to preface, like, you know, I'm not a Brexit expert by any means, and a whole bunch of random stuff can happen. There's a huge unknown variable how that's going to go and how the markets are going to respond to that, right? But here's the thing. If you're going to trade or invest, you have to, like, most of the time you're doing it with some level of uncertainty, right? Because there's never guarantees. You don't know what the future is going to be. So I think oftentimes people will try to look for certainty, and you know, your research, the more you research that kind of stuff, and the more you know about that sort of stuff, then the higher your probabilities of getting it right, your hypothesis being correct. The more you also use a bit of reason as well. However, you're never going to have absolute certainty unless somehow you're on the inside of whatever. And then, you know, there might be some legalities around that, obviously. So that's that. So let's see, other question. Any new project you have been eyeing? How's Promether going? I haven't been really eyeing any new projects, just kind of paying attention to Tezos and seeing what new stuff arises from that. Mostly like a lot of development stuff's been happening. So I just, you know, I just kind of tune in every week to see how that's going. Promether's doing well. I think they're working on encrypted messaging app called Contact. So most of what's been on that has just been development, right? A lot of heads down, just typing code away type of thing. So not a ton has changed in that. That's type of stuff tends to take time. I know actually there's one new project that his friend owns a ghost town in California, an old Western ghost town or whatnot. There might be something interesting that could come out of that, but I don't know, that's kind of up in the air. I don't know all the full details on that, but it certainly seems interesting. Do you think backed and such services can lead to manipulation of the market, long-term suppression of price like it has happened in other markets? That's certainly a possibility. That's certainly possible. Again, I'm still leaning towards things being bullish, but that's certainly, markets do get manipulated. So I have a basic question. When you buy a project, how do you determine what percentage of your split between long-term, mid-term, and short-term bucket? Good question. I don't, currently I don't really have any short-term buckets. I haven't really been doing any trading. I kind of pretty much consider myself a retired trader. Like I'm really not as active as I was, in 2017, for example, right? Very, very active year. I've kind of just shifted gears more passive. It's just way less of a headache. It's pretty much the accounting and taxes that really kind of made me reassess all of that for myself anyways, causing a lot of stress and such and huge, big expense, very big life expense dealing with that. So that's what I've learned in it. There's no point in me, grinding in the markets every day because inevitably it ends up costing me more time and money just to do that because of the current tax system I'm under, right? That's just me. Other people might be in more favorable jurisdictions or have other strategies that they're using. So pretty much a lot of my stuff is like long-term to mid-term. I say long to mid-term because I'm willing to hold everything long-term until certain price targets hit, and then it suddenly shifts into mid-term, right? And like, I don't know what the time frame of specific price targets would be in this cycle, or if they'll ever hit at all. But let's say, for example, let's just say I take Tezos at $10 as a major initial price target. If that happened in a year, it took, like, let's say it took 1 year or 2 years to happen, then I guess that's fairly long term, right? Just holding, staking, whatever. If it suddenly happened next month, then I guess that just suddenly, some of that just shifted into midterm, but still keeping a good chunk, right? Like, so I have certain percentage amounts that I want to sell at different areas if those areas ever hit. Got the whole plan laid out. I just don't know when it's going to happen, right? I can't predict specific time frame. I can guesstimate based on Bitcoin halvings and historical market prices revolving around Bitcoin halvings, including alt seasons, stuff like that, right? That pushes us into 2020, 2021 timeline for like some major stuff, big stuff happening. So that's still a ways out, right? And so that's what I set my expectations as on my personal hypothesis and timeline of when there's probably going to be some heavy profit taking. That said, if it happens sooner, then there's going to be some profit taking, right? Just like Bitcoin, hitting 14K fairly quickly this year, quicker than I anticipated. There had to be some profit taking for myself anyways. I tend to take a middle path with that stuff. So that's me. The majority is pretty much long / mid. Percentage wise, let's say, you know what? Let me just do some quick math here. So like, let's say we hit 10 bucks, probably sell 20% my stash around then, around that area, right? You know, 1/5 type of thing. Probably take a little bit even before then as well, if I want to be a little bit more conservative, maybe even at the $5 area. But I've also learned in the last cycle that one could also cut themselves short. If I take too much profit, I can cut myself short, right? Like, you know, I cut myself short out of Ethereum, Stratus. You know, I still made lots of great money. Bitcoin, I took profit along the way last cycle, major milestones.